Last time on Arthur's Custom Corner, the Brendam Truck Bandit strikes again, leaving behind nothing but his signature calling card, a single patch of oil. The engines all turned on Paxton as he was last seen leaving the scene of the crime. And now we find Paxton on the run and attempting to clear his good name. Meanwhile, Toby progresses on to the semifinals of the Sodor Synchronized Swimming Competition. Will Toby show them just how buoyant this old square can be? Will Paxton be able to live a life on the lam? Will Roger make it the remaining 2 weeks to retirement and collect his ample pension plan? All this and more on this episode of... What? That was the wrong copy? None of that was in the last episode. Well, what kind of rinky-dink Mickey Mouse operation are we running here? Anyway, welcome back to part 2 of my Culdee custom model showcase. Last time, I discussed the full building process of my first 5 Culdee railway engines. I went through how I scratch-built them from just 2 pieces of wood, and I discussed the decision-making process of shaping their models and particular details I added along the way. But there were some details I did skip over. And so, in this video, I'll be going through specifically the superheated engines, Patrick, Alaric, and Eric. And I'm happy to say that some of you guys left comments on the last video asking about details that I did miss, so I'll be doing my best to address those here. So first off, one thing I did gloss over last time was choosing the engine's faces. I generally enjoy choosing faces based on what their basis looked like, or the general vibes that the engine has. Or in some cases, whatever face will fit. But since in the books, we don't really see much of the engines other than Culdee and Patrick, it was a little hard deciding which faces to use. I mean, we don't really know at least half of the engine's vibes. One of the few engines we do get a personality check on is Godred, and so I figured this grumpy smudger face sort of fit the bill. And I already had the 2005 Culdee, so that was an easy choice. So, I did what any rational person would do, and I turned to Twitter for the answer. Sometimes when I'm having trouble with a custom-making decision, I'll ask on Twitter, and the community tends to be pretty responsive and help me get my thinking going. I posted a pic of the faces that I had available, and people really helped out narrowing down which faces fit each engine. So, if you want to possibly have some input on my future customs, feel free to check out my Twitter in the description. Shameless plug, check. Now moving on with the video. Now looking at the models themselves, I did the main build back in the summer of 2022, and I kept them safe for the following year. It was a much more delicate process making the tanks and piston housing for these 3 engines. Their build is a bit more sleek than the first 5 engines, and carving these thin edges was very nerve-wracking. Rightly so, because one of them actually did break at one point. You could still kind of see it at the front of Alaric's running board. Quick tangent. I'm not sure what would qualify as the Culdee engine's running boards. I don't know if this part running along the boiler is the running board, and then there's this red part. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call this the running board and this the wheel coverings. If I'm wrong, sue me. I'll see you in train court. So I needed to modify their sides a little bit. I added these tiny wooden pieces to get the shape of their wheel coverings correct, and make it so it would fit snugly with their pistons. So, the first thing I painted was the black on the side of their boilers, and then drew on the visible inside motion with a pencil. Their gears and piston rods are different from the first 5 Culdee engines, but it was no easier to paint on the silver lining. Like I said last time, silver paint is often rubbery and peels off with the lining tape once it dries. So, I often do this one little trick where, while the paint is still wet, I take off the tape immediately after it's done being applied. It doesn't always produce the best, cleanest edges, but it works well enough. I carefully added each line one at a time, and then used my ball-tip clay tool to add the rounded details. Once I was happy with how the detailing came out, I started painting the models purple. After 3 coats, the base color was done, and I moved on to the boiler details. One nice thing about having a bunch of these models already finished was that I could use the already complete Culdee engines to be a sort of guide for the new ones. I used them as a direct reference for where to put the funnels and domes. So, I marked the spot, drilled the holes, glued them in place, and gave them their paint jobs. Once again, their domes and funnels were Lego cylinders and cones sanded down. With their running boards and smoke boxes painted black, things were once again starting to take shape. At this point, I was kind of unsure on what to do with the running board. The running board is meant to be thin enough that the orange lining covers the full width of it. I was wary of trying to make the running board any thinner for fear of breaking it again, so I debated what to do. I could paint the full width of the running board orange and have one very chunky line, but I knew that would look terrible, so I went with what I do with most running boards, where I paint the side black and then just line out the very top. Oh, I'm realizing while recording this, I forgot to say what paint I used for these guys last time. So once again, pulling from my ancient box of Color Traditions paints, I used grape juice for the purple and kumquat for the orange lining. I used my belt sander to make the engine's buffer beams. I cut a few pieces from my thin piece of Lowe's wood, cut it down to size, and sanded down the sides to make it the same trapezoid shape as the other guys. I gave them their red coat, and slipped them between the chassis and the magnets. From there I carried on with the lining. I painted on the boiler bands and tank lining, and then I gave them their windows, black first, and then outlined them in orange. I painted on the doors, which look a little more oblong, but I don't mind too much. I needed the top of the curve of the door to match up with the top of the tanks, so that it would be one continuous line. I added some more cab detailing, and painted on where the buffer beams met the running board. Things were looking fantastic.
But I was wrong. All was not well.
I made a mistake in the build process. Some of you may have even noticed it. Can you find where Arthur messed up? Well, this show ain't participation based, so I'll just tell you. The superheated engines have rectangular buffer beams with rounded edges. I had built them to match the first 5 buffer beams, which are trapezoids. So now I had to pry off all of the super glued on buffers and start again. Oh, goody. All things considered, it wasn't too bad. Pried off the old buffer beams, cut the wood, sand to shape, drill a hole, paint it on, slap it on there.
Slap it on with the might of Zeus!
After that ordeal, we took a quick break and I gave them an appreciation for high art. And then back to work. I painted on their wheel coverings, giving them a slightly darker shade of red to make them distinct from the buffers. Also painted on their main side rods. I'm realizing now that I omitted their wheel counterweights. I assume I didn't think of it at the time because I was basically out of space. And also, I probably didn't want to tape over any of the silver paint. Once I glued on the tanks, I was nearing the end game and was adding mostly cosmetic details. I couldn't find any silver paper clips for the handrails, so I improvised and cut up some toothpicks and painted them silver. Looks good enough to me. I thought they could use a little more visual texture, so I added these tubes which run along the bottom of the Snowden engine's boilers. This was made from a Lego lightsaber/stick piece. I also added these little vertical tubes made from the same Lego piece. And I'm not sure why. Looking back at the Snowden engines, I don't think they have anything like this. Not sure how I feel about them anymore. Bringing us back to the topic of faces, the rear faces of the engines needed some attention. Like I said last time, I had 3 1996 Culdees, all of which I used their back faces for Ernest, Wilfred, and Shane. I appropriately gave Godred the jacked up Culdee face, and for Culdee, I had a spare D261 face lying around from a failed custom from years ago. That left me with the 3 remaining faces I'd collected, and my options weren't great. While these models' cabs are taller than an average wooden railway one, I had saved the 3 largest faces for last. I had a Trackmaster Kevin, a 2002 Terrence, which I sanded down to flatten the top, and the face from the 2005 Culdee. I really hadn't thought about the fact that the 2005 face covered the entire model's cab, so I had to adjust my lining on the cab to fit these larger faces. Once again, I painted the faces purple with my airbrush, and then hand-painted on their eyes and eyebrows, and then stuck them on the back of the cab, with minimal re-airbrushing required. This is probably my biggest gripe with these customs. The fact that I used faces that were making the lining uneven still kinda bugs me. In retrospect, there were definitely other rectangular faces I could have used that would have been much more reasonably sized for these customs. Heck, I even have some on hand that I should have used back then. I have no idea why I used the Tomy Kevin instead of the wooden railway one I already had. They're the exact same face, just one is smaller. Oh well. I don't really plan on changing these guys anytime soon. And hey, it's the little oddities that give these guys their character. And speaking of faces, one question I've been getting pretty frequently recently is whether or not I've ever toyed around with making custom faces. The quick answer to that is no. The closest I've ever come to customizing a face is when I gave Donald, in my Blue Donald and Douglas customs, a smile. Other than that, I've never really had much interest in customizing faces. I feel like it'd be very difficult to get the smooth, rounded texture that regular wooden railway faces have. But I'm always open to trying new things, so who knows? From here, I gave them these little tank caps, which I don't think the Snowden engines 6 through 8 have, but I just like it for the visual symmetry between all 8 engines. I also forgot to mention in the last video that one of the last details for all of these engines were adding these little red and yellow plaques. I assume that these are engine works or railway plaques, but I can't say for certain. The last detail I added was printing out their nameplates and numbers using the same format as the last bunch. Stuck them on with a glue stick, and I would call them finished. And there you have it. That's how I made all 8 of my Culdee Fell Railway customs. I'm immensely proud of how they came out, and while they do have little things that I would change about them, I think, for the time being, I'm very proud to call them some of my best customs. But I'm not done with the Culdee Fell Railway just yet. One thing I've mentioned is that these guys are way out of scale with all of the other wooden railway line, and as such, the original wooden railway rolling stock that went with them doesn't really fit them anymore. And so, my next project is making Culdee Fell Railway rolling stock. As I've shown, I've already started working on the trucks. I really just need to finish his face and then I'd be willing to call him complete. But I also have a number of Culdee Fell coaches in the works. I've already cut and sanded to shape 3 covered coaches, which were cut from the same piece of wood as the Culdee Fell engines. And while the coaches themselves are scratch-built, I'll be taking the chassis from 3 old wooden railway Chinese dragons. And I'll also be making 1 open coach from this factory-era wooden railway fire engine thing. So yeah, keep an eye out for updates on my Culdee Fell rolling stock. But that's just about all I have to say about the Culdee Fell engines. I really hope you all enjoyed this 2-part showcase. Maybe I'll break up some of my other collections into multi-part videos going forward. We'll see. But for now, thank you all for watching. I really hope you all enjoyed, and this is Arthur the LMS Engine, signing off.